Imagine a pope excommunicating a bishop, and imagine that bishop, centuries later, is proclaimed a saint and doctor of the church by that same church. It seems impossible, yet it really happened, and not in a forgotten corner of history, but in the midst of the most serious crisis the first Christian millennium had ever known. Keep this ancient story in mind, because recently a bishop brought it up again, and he did so for a very specific reason. But let's start from the end. That is, from what happened a few days ago in one of the places most beloved by Catholics in the entire world. Let's talk about Lourdes, the sanctuary that grew up around the grotto where the Madonna appeared to Bernadette, a destination every year for millions of pilgrims from every continent. The local bishop, Monsignor Jean-Marc Micasse, signed a statement dated August 13, and that text cancels an authorization that had already existed within the sanctuary for some time. It concerns the Society of St. Pius X, which from now on will no longer celebrate Mass within the sacred precinct, will no longer administer the sacraments, and will no longer lead public prayers. Access, however, remains open. And this is the point that many titles have missed. Anyone can still enter, climb up to the cave, and pray privately. Ask yourself then why a bishop would sign such a text, and you will see that the answer lies in two very close dates. Let us go back to July 1st, when in Econ, Switzerland, the society proceeded to consecrate new bishops without the authorization of Pope Leo XV and against his will. The canonical consequences followed the next day. On July 2nd, the Holy See declared that 6 bishops of the society had incurred automatic excommunication. The Bishop of Lourdes cites that very decree in his statement, and he bases the entire decision he made for the sanctuary on that decree. Add that the society, as reported by French newspapers that are following the affair closely, has filed an appeal against that same excommunication decree. The bishop writes, and his tone surprises those who have stopped at the headlines, that he is textually well aware of the pain and perhaps the misunderstanding that his decision will cause. He then speaks of a wound and chooses an ancient and very heavy image, the tearing of Christ's tunic, the tunic that the soldiers did not want to divide under the cross. He concludes by invoking Our Lady of Lourdes to come to his aid, and the formula he uses excludes no one because he asks for that help for everyone. Naturally, the traditional world reacted, and the most resounding reaction came from a French newspaper close to that environment, not from an official statement from the fraternity. The editorial writes that double standards apply here and adds a precise sentence. Our reaction is not anger, it is first and foremost immense sadness. On August 17th, Monsignor Athanasius Schneider, auxiliary bishop of Astana, broke his silence with his first public text after the excommunications at the beginning of July. He titles his work in a way that alone explains everything: the dilemma between preserving the unequivocal integrity of the Catholic faith and being canonically recognized by the Pope. He himself explained to the journalist who published the text that he wanted to offer elements for deeper reflection and historical examples that would help understand the dilemma in which the fraternity believes it finds itself. That is, he deliberately avoids issuing a definitive judgment on Rome's actions, and this very abstention is the key to reading the rest of his long work. Let us then return to that distant year, 1357, in the midst of the Arian crisis, when the Catholic world was split over the question of whether the Son was truly God. In that year, Pope Liberius signed an ambiguous formula of faith, from which the decisive term, the one declaring the Son consubstantial with the Father, had been removed. He then entered into communion, under pressure from the emperor, with Arian and semi-Arian bishops, and commanded Athanasius of Alexandria to do exactly the same. Athanasius refused to obey, and so the Pope excommunicated him accusing him of disturbing the peace of the Church, as attested by Saint Hilary of Poitiers and other ancient sources. Meanwhile, Athanasius continued to govern his diocese in Alexandria, and not only that, he showed understanding for the deplorable conduct of the Pope who had just struck him. Athanasius then thanked Liberius's successor, Pope St. Damasus, and consulted him on the questions of the Eastern bishops as if that excommunication had never existed. Now look how it ends. Liberius was the first pope not to be canonized, while Athanasius was canonized and, moreover, declared a doctor of the Church. Finally, note the sharp conclusion that the Bishop of Astana draws from this. Today, Athanasius would be considered schismatic, according to the definition of schism in the current code. He then distinguishes very carefully, and this distinction is the most useful part of his writing for anyone who wants to really understand something about this story. He points to two tendencies that he considers unhealthy and have grown over the centuries: legalism, that is, rigid adherence to the letter of the law, and papalism, that is, almost absolute and undifferentiated obedience. Remember that the code defines schism as the refusal of submission to the Supreme Pontiff or of communion with the members of the Church subject to him. He explains, however, that formal schism is something else. It is the rejection in principle of papal authority through the institution of a separate hierarchy, as happened in the East in 154. He therefore maintains that one cannot speak of a formal schism as long as faith in the dogma of primacy and the desire to live under the authority of the Pope remain intact. He adds an argument that must be well understood. The norm that requires the papal mandate to consecrate a bishop belongs to positive law and not to divine law. He argues thus: if it belonged to divine law, that norm would have been observed throughout the history of the Church, always, everywhere, and by everyone, without a single exception. He then takes up a very harsh phrase by the Bishop of Regensburg, Rudolf Graber, written more than 50 years ago, according to which the Arian crisis is repeating itself in our day. Graber said that today, exile is replaced by confinement in the silence of being ignored, and that physical killing is replaced by the assassination of a person's character. Finally, in his parable, a fire breaks out in a large house, and the fire chief authorizes only the new methods, even though they have proven less effective than the old ones. He disobeys a group of firefighters, continues to use the same tried and tested methods, even trains new ones, and in many areas of the house, the fire is contained. They are still branded as disobedient and punished, until over time a different leader arrives who recognizes the limitations of the new methods and calls them all back in. The bishop then concludes that once that great shock had passed, what had been condemned as pure rebellion was revealed to have actually been an act of selfless dedication. Many, on the other hand, argue that the Pope's mandate is precisely what holds the body of bishops together, and that without it, everyone would go their own way. Meanwhile, silence returns to Lourdes, and the grotto remains where it is, with the water flowing and the candles continuing to burn, exactly as they do every day. Everyone can still climb up there, even those whose voices have just been taken away by the sanctuary, and they can pray. Only now they must do so in silence, one by one. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment Amen. God bless you.